We've spent the last three episodes talking about your patient's nervous systems, but this time, this episode is all about yours. Hey there, I'm Jamie Johnston, and you're stepping into a new era of thriving as a massage therapist. We're embracing who you are, pursuing what you love, and confidently shaping your practice. We'll challenge industry norms, spark change, and discuss what truly matters. Things like mental health, evidence-based practice, and some topics we've long avoided. Let's create better outcomes for our patients and happier, more fulfilling practices together. Welcome to the New Generation Massage Therapist Podcast. Welcome back to the New Generation Massage Therapist Podcast. I'm Jamie Johnston. And this is episode 4, the final episode of our series on trauma and the nervous system. In episode 1, we looked at what trauma does to the nervous system. In episode 2, we tracked how it plays out across a lifetime. And in episode 3, we got practical. What trauma-informed care actually looks like in a session, on the table, and in your room. But today, we turn the lens around, because here's something we don't talk about enough in this profession. The work you do is heavy. Listening to your patients' struggles, having them open up about their trauma, holding space for their pain, and physically managing everything that comes with delivering a treatment, that carries a real emotional and physical weight. And if you're showing up for complex, trauma-affected patients with the skill and sensitivity that this series has been all about, you're absorbing some of that in the process. Let's be clear, that's not a weakness. That's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. That's just simply the cost of caring. And it puts you directly at risk for something called compassion fatigue. So before we close out this series, I want to talk about you. Compassion fatigue isn't just feeling tired after a long day on your feet. It has two distinct components, and understanding the difference really matters. The first is secondary traumatic stress. This is what happens when you absorb the emotional weight of your patient's trauma simply by hearing about it. You don't have to have lived through the experience yourself. You just have to care enough to be present with someone who has. And for most of us, that's every session. Secondary traumatic stress can happen suddenly. One difficult disclosure, one session that stays with you, one patient whose story you can't shake on the drive home. It doesn't build slowly. It can arrive fast. And it can feel a lot like the symptoms of trauma itself. The second component is burnout. And burnout is different. It's slower. It's a gradual accumulation of emotional exhaustion caused by long-term exposure to the demands of the job. The physical load, the administrative stress, the financial pressure, the emotional labor of showing up fully for patient after patient, week after week. Together, secondary traumatic stress and burnout, these two things can erode something that is fundamental to what we do. They can reduce your capacity for empathy. They can leave you with overwhelming feelings of exhaustion and cynicism, a sense that the work doesn't matter the way it used to, a lost sense of personal accomplishment, the feeling that no matter what you do, it's never quite enough. If any of that sounds familiar, I want you to know you are not broken. Your scale is just tipped. Let me introduce you to a framework that I think is genuinely useful here. It's called the Job Demands Resources Model. So picture a balance scale. One side, you have your job demands, the things that cost you, the physical intensity of the work, hearing secondary trauma session after session, clinic rent, administrative load, the daily background stress of running a practice and showing up as a professional. That side of the scale can get heavy. On the other side, you have your job resources, the things that replenish you, the supports, the skills, the relationships, and the conditions that allow you to absorb the demands without being depleted by them. When the demands outweigh the resources, the scale tips. And when it stays tipped for long enough, that's when you start to feel it. You've probably heard this described as the empty cup analogy before. You can't pour from an empty cup. It sounds simple, but do we actually act on it? Here's what makes this model more than just a metaphor. The science actually backs it up. And it connects directly back to everything we've talked about in this series. Because your HPA axis, that same hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis as we discussed in episode 1, doesn't balance the scale, it reacts to it. When your job demands are high and your resources are low, your HPA axis does exactly what it was designed to do. It releases cortisol and adrenaline to help you cope. And in the short term, that works. But if your scale stays tipped, if those demands keep overwhelming your resources over weeks and months, your HPA axis stays activated. Cortisol stays chronically elevated, and you end up experiencing the same physiological depletion in your own body that you've been treating in your patients. And the solution isn't to manage the stress response. The solution is to build your resources so the scale balances, so the HPA axis can switch off and your body can actually recover. So, how do we do that? How do we actually build the other side of the scale? The research points to 3 core psychological needs. And when these are met, they act as a powerful buffer against both burnout and secondary traumatic stress. The first one is autonomy, having a voice and a genuine sense of control over how you practice. This matters more than most of us realize. When therapists feel autonomous in their clinical decision making, when they feel like they're practicing on their own terms rather than being dictated to, the research shows that they feel more competent, more connected, and significantly more protected against burnout. Autonomy doesn't mean that you're just working alone. It's about feeling like the work is yours, that your clinical judgment is trusted, that you have a say in how your practice runs and how your sessions unfold. The second thing is competence. Feeling highly skilled, effective, and confident in your work is one of the most protective things you can cultivate as a therapist. This is why continuing education matters, not just for your patients, but for you. When you feel genuinely capable, when you walk into a session knowing you have the tools to handle what comes up, that confidence is a resource and it goes on the right side of the scale. So seek it out actively, whether that's formal training, podcasts like this one, books, mentorship, or peer learning. Invest in your own clinical development as seriously as you invest in your patient's recovery. A therapist who feels competent is a therapist who can sustain this work long term. So the third thing is relatedness. And this one might be the most important. Relatedness is all about peer support, professional community, the experience of being known and respected by the people around you in your field. Here's what the research shows, and I find this genuinely remarkable. Feeling respected as a professional is one of the strongest buffers against the heavy physical demands of our job. In fact, perceived professional respect is the only job resource that has been shown to specifically buffer against the physical strain of the work. So think about what that means. When your professional expertise is valued, when you are treated as an equal, when your clinical judgment is respected, that psychological fulfillment acts as a counterweight to the physical toll of the job in a way that nothing else quite replicates. So protect your boundaries, advocate for your profession, lean on your clinical community, seek out peers who challenge and support you. Find the spaces, like this one, where the work you do is taken seriously. Because you can't sustain this work in isolation, and you shouldn't have to. I want to close the loop on something before we finish. We started this series talking about the patient's nervous system, how trauma dysregulates the HPA axis, how it rewires the stress response, and how it leaves the body stuck in survival mode. And now, 4 episodes later, we're talking about your nervous system. And the same physiology applies. Chronic stress, elevated cortisol, a system that stays activated because the demands keep coming and the resources aren't there to balance them. The difference is you have the knowledge now. You understand the mechanism and you have the ability to be intentional about building the resources that protect you. Autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Put the weight on that side of the scale, deliberately, consistently. Because the work you do matters, and it requires a version of you that has something left to give. That's the cost of caring. And that's why protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's clinical. So that's a wrap on our 4-part series on trauma and the nervous system. We've covered a lot of ground together, from the neuroscience of trauma to how it plays out across a lifetime, to what trauma informed care looks like in practice, to what this work costs us and how we protect ourselves. If this series has shifted something in how you think about your patients or about yourself, share it with a colleague who needs to hear it. And if you want to take everything from this series and build it into a real clinical framework, the course is open. The Fundamentals of Therapeutic Movement for Trauma Competent Therapists. Everything we've talked about across these 4 episodes and the practical tools to put it in action. The link's in the show notes. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.